In the sun-drenched savanna of the Jua region, there stood a village known for its ivory estate, a collection of white stone houses that shimmered like pearls under the African sun. This was a land of strict traditions, where a woman's worth was measured by the elegance of her head wraps and the intricate patterns of her braided hair. Among the wealthy and the proud lived Zuri, a girl whose name once meant beautiful, but who had become a shadow in her own home. Zuri was an orphan, the daughter of a legendary weaver whose hands had once created the most sacred cloths in the valley. After her parents perished in a great fire, Zuri was taken in by her maternal aunt, Lady Malila. However, Malila's house was not a home for Zuri. It was a prison of labor and silent tears. Lady Malila had two daughters of her own, Binta and Shani, who were as arrogant as they were idle. They spent their days bathing in milk and scented oils, while Zuri was forced to scrub the floors and tend to the charcoal stoves. Because Zuri was always covered in soot from the kitchen, the village children, egged on by Binta and Shani, called her the Ash Girl. They laughed at her tattered clothes and her dusty face, never noticing that beneath the layer of grey ash, Zuri possessed a radiant complexion and eyes that held the spark of an ancient lineage. Her hair was her only remaining pride, thick obsidian coils that reached her shoulders, a gift she inherited from her mother. The atmosphere in Jua shifted when the great chief announced the ball of the ancestral lineage. It was a sacred event, held once every 20 years, where the young heir to the throne, Prince Azaka, would seek a bride whose spirit and bloodline were worthy of the golden stool. Every maiden in the village was invited, and for the first time in years, Zuri felt a flicker of hope. She knew she had no fine silks, but she remembered her mother's secret trunk buried beneath the floorboards of their old hut. Inside was a cloth woven with the spirit thread, a fabric that shimmered like moonlight. Zuri dreamt of wearing it, and finally being seen as a human being again, rather than a servant to her cousin's whims. It is quite remarkable when you think about it, how a story born in the heart of a village like Jua can travel across vast oceans and reach people in every corner of the globe. English, much like the ancient trade routes of our ancestors, has become a medium that allows us to share these deep cultural mysteries with millions. It is spoken in so many different countries, each bringing a unique rhythm to the words. I am truly curious to know where this story finds you today. Are you watching from the vibrant markets of Lagos, the busy streets of London, or perhaps a quiet town in Brazil or the United States? Please, drop a comment below and let me know which country you are watching from. I would love to greet our global family. As the day of the ball approached, the cruelty in Lady Malila's house intensified. Binta and Shani were obsessed with their own preparations, yet they were consumed by a strange paranoia. They noticed that no matter how much ash they rubbed on Zuri's face or how many heavy water pots they made her carry, she seemed to grow more graceful. Her hair, in particular, seemed to glow with a life of its own, even without the expensive oils they used. "She has the weaver's blood," Lady Malila whispered to her daughters one evening. "If she appears at the ball, her natural elegance might catch the prince's eye, and then we will be the ones scrubbing the floors." The sisters' jealousy grew into a dark, suffocating vine. They didn't just want to outshine Zuri, they wanted to erase her identity. They began to spread rumors in the village square, claiming that Zuri was cursed and that her beautiful hair was actually a nest for dark spirits. They hoped the villagers would shun her, but the prince's scouts had already been seen near the ivory estate, asking about the girl who works in the embers. The threat of Zuri's potential success was more than they could bear. They knew they had to act before the moon reached its peak, for once the ball began, Zuri would be protected by the laws of the chief. On the final night of preparations, the ivory estate was filled with the scent of jasmine and the sound of distant drums. While Zuri slept in the kitchen corner, exhausted from a day of endless labor, she clutched a small piece of her mother's spirit thread. She fell into a deep sleep, dreaming of the ancestors and the great python that was said to guard the souls of the righteous. She did not hear the creaking of the floorboards or the hushed giggles of Binta and Shani as they approached her with a pair of rusted cold-iron shears. They were not there to steal her dress or her joy. They were there to take the one thing that made her feel like a princess. The iron was cold, But the sisters' hearts were colder, and the betrayal about to unfold would awaken a power that the village of Jua had not seen in 1,000 years. The darkness of the kitchen was absolute, save for the dying embers of the hearth that cast long, flickering shadows against the stone walls. Zuri lay on her thin mat of woven reeds, her breathing shallow and peaceful, unaware that the air around her had grown thick with malice. Above her, Binta and Shani stood like twin vultures, their faces distorted by the faint orange glow of the coals. In Shani's hand, the rusted iron shears glinted, a jagged, cruel instrument that had once been used for shearing the coarse wool of goats. They didn't want a clean cut. They wanted a jagged, painful reminder of her low status. With a synchronized nod of wicked intent, Shani reached down and grabbed the first of Zuri's thick obsidian coils. Zuri woke with a sharp gasp as the cold metal touched her scalp. Before she could scream, Binta slammed a soot-covered hand over her mouth, pinning her head against the hard floor. "Stay still, Ash girl," Binta hissed, her eyes wide with a manic energy. "We are only helping you. Why should a servant carry the weight of a crown? You belong to the dust, and the dust has no hair." The sound of the shears was sickening, a rhythmic metallic grinding as the blades tore through the strong, healthy strands. Zuri struggled, her muffled cries vibrating against Binta's palm, but the sisters were fueled by a year's worth of hidden resentment. They hacked at her hair with savage joy, leaving behind a mess of uneven patches and bleeding nicks from the dull edges of the tool. Within minutes, the floor was covered in the beautiful dark hair that had been Zuri's only pride. She felt the cold air hitting her raw scalp for the first time, a sensation of nakedness and profound shame that pierced deeper than any blade. Shani threw the shears into the ashes and stood back, laughing softly. "There. Now you can go to the ball and show the prince your true self, a plucked bird, a cursed orphan with the head of a lizard." They didn't stop there. Fearing that their mother might face questions if Zuri were found in the house, they dragged her toward the edge of the ivory estate. They pushed her into the tall, dry grass of the sacred forest, warning her that if she returned before the festivities were over, they would tell the chief she had stolen the spirit thread. Zuri collapsed into the dirt, her hands instinctively reaching up to touch the jagged, painful surface of her head. She felt the warmth of blood where the shears had bitten too deep. She was broken, not just in body but in spirit. She felt as though her mother's legacy had been physically ripped from her soul. But as she lay there, weeping into the earth, a strange silence fell over the sacred forest. The wind stopped its rustling and the insects ceased their nocturnal choir. It is in these moments of absolute brokenness that we often find the strength we never knew we possessed. Just as a forest regenerates after a fire, a community thrives when its members lift each other up. If you are moved by Zuri's resilience in the face of such cruelty, please consider subscribing to our channel and leaving a like. Your support is the rain that helps these stories grow, ensuring that the light of truth always shines through the darkness of betrayal. The sacred forest was a place where the villagers of Jua rarely dared to venture at night. It was said to be the home of the Ancient Ones, spirits who had existed long before the first stone of the ivory estate was laid. Zuri wandered blindly through the undergrowth, her bare feet stepping on thorns she could no longer feel. The shame of her appearance felt like a heavy shroud, and she wished for the earth to open up and swallow her whole. She reached the center of the forest, where a massive, ancient baobab tree stood, its trunk wide enough to house a dozen men. At the base of the tree was a hidden spring, its water shimmering with a strange emerald light. Exhausted and parched from her tears, Zuri crawled to the edge of the water. She leaned over to drink, but as she saw her reflection in the glowing pool, she let out a fresh sob. In the moonlight, her head looked like a landscape of ruins, scarred, bloody, and barren. "Mother, why have you forsaken me?" she cried out to the canopy. "I have nothing left." But as her tears fell into the spring, the emerald water began to boil. A low rhythmic hiss filled the air, sounding like 1,000 whispers coming from the roots of the world. The ground beneath her began to vibrate, and from the center of the spring, a massive shadow rose. It was not a monster, but a guardian. The great python spirit, a creature of emerald scales and golden eyes, emerged from the depths, its body thick as a tree trunk. Zuri was frozen with terror, But the serpent did not strike. It lowered its head until its snout was inches from her scarred scalp. Its tongue flickered, tasting the salt of her tears and the iron of her blood. "The blades of the wicked have cleared the path," a voice echoed in Zuri's mind, deep and ancient. "They thought to humiliate you, but they have only prepared the soil for a royal harvest. You are the weaver's daughter, and tonight the Great Spirit shall weave a crown that no iron can ever touch." The python began to circle her, its scales glowing with an intense hypnotic light as the transformation began. The great python's spirit did not move with the aggression of a predator, but with the fluid, calculated grace of a divine weaver. As its massive emerald-scaled body coiled around Zuri, she felt a strange warmth radiating from the serpent's skin, a heat that began to soothe the stinging nicks and jagged wounds left by her sister's shears. The air in the sanctuary of the ancient baobab grew heavy with the scent of crushed herbs, damp earth, and an electric charge that made the fine hairs on Zuri's arms stand on end. She found that she could no longer move her limbs, but she was not afraid. A profound sense of belonging washed over her, as if the forest itself had been waiting for this moment of ultimate brokenness to claim her as its own. "They sought to make you barren, like the scorched earth," the spirit's voice resonated through the very marrow of Zuri's bones. "They believe that beauty is a thin veil that can be stripped away with cold iron, but they have forgotten that the most potent life grows beneath the surface, protected by the roots of the ancestors." The python lowered its heavy head, pressing its cool, dry snout against Zuri's forehead. At the point of contact, a surge of energy, like a bolt of green lightning, shot through Zuri's scalp. She let out a silent cry as the pain of her humiliation was replaced by a ferocious, throbbing life. It felt as though 1,000 tiny seeds were germinating simultaneously beneath her skin, pushing upward with a hunger that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Then, the miracle began to manifest. From the scarred patches where her hair had been hacked away, small shimmering heads began to emerge. They were not strands of dead protein, but living extensions of the python's own essence. Miniature emerald serpents, their scales flecked with 24-karat gold, sprouted from her scalp. At first they were small and delicate, weaving themselves together like the intricate braids of a royal priestess. As they grew, they didn't hiss with malice. Instead, they emitted a low melodic hum that sounded like a choir of flutes. Their eyes were tiny rubies that flickered with intelligence, and as they reached the length of Zuri's waist, they began to move with a synchronized rhythmic sway that mimicked the flow of a river. Zuri reached up with trembling fingers, expecting to feel the rough, uneven stubble of her shaved head. Instead, her hands met the smooth, cool, and muscular forms of the snakes. They nuzzled against her palms with a strange affection, their bodies soft yet incredibly strong. She was no longer the ash girl with the jagged scalp. She was a living Medusa of the savannah, a vessel for a guardian spirit that had been dormant for centuries. The python spirit pulled back, its mission complete. "These are your protectors, Zuri. They are the truth seekers. They will feel the pulse of a liar's heart and see the venom in a jealous soul. They will be your hair, your crown, and your army. But remember, the power they hold is only as pure as the heart of the one who carries them." As Zola looked into the emerald spring, she did not see a monster. She saw a woman of terrifying beauty. The green and gold serpents framed her face like a majestic headdress, their movements adding an aura of supernatural authority to her every gesture. She realized that her aunt and cousins had unwittingly performed a ritual of initiation. By shaving her head, they had removed the last of her human vanity, making room for the ancestral divinity to take root. She felt a surge of confidence that was not her own, a cold, steady resolve that demanded justice. The spirit thread her mother had left her, which she still clutched in her hand, began to glow in response to her transformation, weaving itself into a gown of liquid light that draped over her shoulders. However, the spirit had one final lesson for her before the sun began to rise. "Justice is not a flame that consumes everything in its path," the serpent whispered as it began to recede into the dark waters of the spring. "Justice is a mirror. It returns to the sender exactly what they have given to the world. Do not seek to strike, Zuri. Simply exist in your truth and let the snakes do the rest." The ball of the ancestral lineage is not a place for a victim. It is a stage for a queen. Go now and let the village of Jua see what happens when you try to bury a seed that was meant to touch the sky. The python disappeared with a final ripple, leaving Zuri alone in the clearing, her new crown of living emeralds glowing softly in the twilight. Zuri stood up, her posture straighter than it had ever been. She felt light, yet powerful. The snakes on her head seemed to whisper to her, telling her stories of the old world, of queens who ruled with wisdom and warriors who fought with the strength of the earth. She began her walk back toward the ivory estate, but she did not take the back paths or the service entrances. She walked through the heart of the forest, her living hair parting the branches for her, her feet barely touching the thorns. She knew that the ball was starting, and that her aunt and cousins would be there, basking in their perceived victory. Little did they know that the plucked bird they had discarded was returning with the fangs of the ancestors and the crown of the great python. The ivory estate was a spectacle of light and opulence. Torches made of scented cedar wood lined the grand courtyard, casting a warm, flickering glow over the assembly of the region's elite. The sound of talking drums and ivory trumpets echoed against the white stone walls, creating a heartbeat that throbbed through the very earth of Jua. Maidens from every corner of the savannah had arrived, adorned in the finest silks, their hair styled into towering masterpieces of braids, beads, and golden wire. Among them, Binta and Shani moved with an unbearable air of triumph. They wore gowns of shimmering crimson, their hair oiled to a blinding sheen, confident that with the ash girl out of the way, the prince's gaze would have nowhere else to land. Prince Azaka sat upon the golden stool, his expression polite but distant. He had watched dozens of women dance before him, each one more desperate than the last to impress him with their status. To him, they all looked like the same flower repeated in a garden of vanity. He found himself looking toward the entrance, remembering the whispers of his scouts about a girl who worked in the embers but possessed the spirit of a lioness. But the scouts had returned with empty hands, reporting that the girl had vanished. Just as the chief was about to declare the final dance, a sudden chilling silence swept through the courtyard. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the space, leaving only a heavy electric tension that made the torches flicker and turn a strange, pale green. A figure appeared at the threshold of the great gate. She was draped in a veil of mystical gossamer that seemed to be made of trapped moonlight, hiding her face and head from view. Her gown, woven from the legendary spirit thread, clung to her body like liquid silver, moving with a fluid grace that made her seem to float above the stone floor. As she stepped forward, the drums stopped. The flutes went silent. The only sound was the rhythmic metallic rustle of her dress and a faint melodic humming that seemed to come from the air around her. Binta and Shani narrowed their eyes, their hearts racing with a sudden, inexplicable dread. They didn't recognize her, but they felt a power emanating from her that made their own expensive silks feel like coarse burlap. Zuri walked to the center of the dance floor, directly beneath the gaze of Prince Azaka. She did not bow, she stood as an equal. The prince leaned forward, his interest finally piqued. "Who is this maiden who enters our sacred ball under a veil?" he asked, his voice echoing in the silence. "Is she a guest from a far land or a spirit sent to test us?" Zuri remained silent for a heartbeat, then she began to dance. It was not the rehearsed, stiff dance of the other maidens. It was a primal, serpentine movement, a slow, hypnotic undulation of her torso and arms that mimicked the swaying of the sacred forest in a storm. As she moved, the veil began to slip, caught by a wind that didn't exist for anyone else in the room. Then came the moment that would be etched into the history of Jua forever. Zuri reached up with hands that were clean and soft, and with a single, fluid motion, she cast the moonlight veil aside. A collective gasp, followed by screams of terror and wonder, erupted from the crowd. Where there should have been the jagged, scarred scalp that Binta and Shani had created, there was a crown of living emeralds. The snakes, now long, sleek, and magnificent, coiled and uncoiled in a mesmerizing display of green and gold. Their ruby eyes caught the torchlight, glowing like embers from the forge of the gods. They didn't strike or hiss. They moved with a regal elegance, weaving themselves into living patterns that shifted with every beat of Zuri's heart. Binta and Shani fell backward, their faces contorted in a mask of pure horror. "It's the Ash Girl!" Shani shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. "She is a monster, a demon from the forest." But as they spoke, the snakes on Zuri's head reacted. They didn't lunge at the sisters, but their tiny heads turned toward them, and their ruby eyes began to pulse with a blinding light. Suddenly, the sisters found themselves unable to speak. Every time they tried to utter a lie or a mockery, their voices turned into the dry, hollow rattle of a dying serpent. The power of the truth-seekers was in full effect. The snakes were projecting the sisters' own inner venom back at them, making their cruelty visible to everyone in the assembly. Prince Azaka stood up from the golden stool, stepping down toward the dance floor. He was not afraid. He was captivated. He saw the scars on Zuri's scalp that the snakes were carefully protecting, and he understood the story of the blades and the betrayal. He saw the strength of a woman who had been humiliated and returned as a goddess. "The ancestors have spoken," the prince declared, his voice booming over the whispers of the frightened crowd. "This is not a monster. This is the Weaver's daughter, crowned by the Great Spirit itself. While others brought gold to buy my favor, she brought the truth of the earth." He reached out his hand, and for the first time in her life, Zuri felt the touch of a man who saw her for exactly who she was. The grand courtyard of the Ivory Estate, once filled with the superficial laughter of the elite, was now a theater of divine reckoning. Prince Azaka stood before Zuri, his hand outstretched in a gesture of absolute reverence. The living crown of emerald snakes atop Zuri's head swayed gently, their ruby eyes glowing with a protective warmth as they sensed the sincerity in the prince's heart. However, the air remained thick with the stench of exposed secrets. Lady Malila, seeing her daughter's public humiliation and the total collapse of her carefully constructed status, felt a surge of desperate, irrational rage. She pushed through the crowd, her face a mask of contorted fury. "This is a trick," she screamed, her voice cracking like dry wood. "She is a cursed orphan who has brought witchcraft into our sacred halls. Guards, seize her and burn the demons from her head." The guards stepped forward, their iron spears trembling in their hands, but they did not reach Zuri. The snakes on her head suddenly expanded, their emerald bodies lengthening and thickening until they formed a shimmering, impenetrable shield of scales around her. A low, vibrating hum filled the courtyard, a sound so powerful it caused the stone walls to shiver. As the guards retreated in terror, the snakes turned their gaze toward Lady Malila and her daughters. The power of the truth-seekers began to manifest its final judgment. The snakes did not bite. Instead, they exhaled a fine, golden mist that enveloped the three women. In this mist, the villagers saw visions of the sisters sneaking into the kitchen with rusted shears, the cruelty of their laughter, and the years of silent abuse Zuri had endured in the ashes. The truth was now an undeniable weight in the room. The chief of Jua, horrified by the evidence of such darkness within his own tribe, stood from his seat. "The venom was never in the snakes," he declared, his voice heavy with ancient authority. "The venom was in your hearts. You sought to shave her head to humiliate her, but you only succeeded in revealing your own boldness of spirit." As the chief spoke, the magical mist settled on Malila, Binta, and Shani. The curse of the rattle became permanent. They could no longer speak a single word of human language. Whenever they tried to lie or manipulate, only the dry, hollow sound of a rattlesnake would emerge from their throats, a constant reminder to the village of the poison they had tried to spread. They were banished from the Ivory Estate, destined to live as outcasts in the very dust they had forced Zuri to sleep in. With the darkness purged, a profound peace settled over the assembly. Prince Azaka took the royal necklace of sunstones and placed it around Zuri's neck. "You were born in the ashes, but you were forged in the fire of resilience," he said softly. "A crown of gold is heavy and cold, but a crown given by the Great Spirit is a living bond between the queen and her land. Will you rule by my side, not as a wife of status, but as the guardian of our truth?" Zuri looked at the prince, then at the villagers, who were now bowing in genuine respect. She felt the snakes on her head relax, their emerald bodies coiling into a beautiful permanent headdress that looked like the most intricate braids ever woven. "I will," she replied, "and our palace shall have no walls, for a queen who is protected by the earth has nothing to fear from the shadows." As we reach the conclusion of this epic journey, we are reminded that the things meant to break us are often the very things that make us indestructible. Zuri's story is a testament to the fact that your true identity cannot be stolen by iron or hidden by ash. Justice may be slow, but like a serpent in the grass, it always finds its way to the light. If you have been inspired by Zuri's rise from the embers to the golden stool, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button one last time. Your support ensures that the spirit of these African legends continues to breathe and inspire new generations across the globe. We thank you for walking this path of magic and truth with us, and we look forward to bringing you more tales of ancient power. The coronation of Queen Zuri became the most celebrated event in the history of the Jua region. She did not cast away her living crown. The emerald snakes remained with her throughout her long and prosperous reign. They became the symbols of her justice, growing and changing with her wisdom. Under her rule, the ivory estate was transformed into a sanctuary for orphans and the forgotten, ensuring that no child would ever have to sleep in the ashes again. The legend of the Medusa of the savannah traveled far and wide, warning the cruel that the hair they cut today might just return as the protectors of tomorrow. The great python spirit returned to its emerald spring, satisfied that its chosen weaver was finally sitting on the throne she was always meant to occupy. Today, if you visit the ancient ruins of the Jua region, you will see stones carved with the image of a woman whose hair is made of serpents. The elders say that on nights when the moon is full and the wind is still, you can still hear the melodic humming of the truth-seekers. It is a reminder that beauty is a living thing, rooted in character and guarded by the ancestors. The story of Zuri is finished, but its echoes remain in every heart that chooses to rise after being pushed down. Remember, no matter what the world tries to take from you, they can never reach the seed of divinity that lives within your soul. Walk with the grace of the serpent and the strength of the weaver, for your crown is already waiting for you in the light of the truth.